Hi boys and girls, welcome to 6th grade Life Science. Today's standard that we're going to review is Life Science 6.3.1, and that standard states, use scientific reasoning to explain differences between biotic and abiotic factors that demonstrate what living organisms need to survive. Welcome to Ms. Walker's 6th grade virtual science class. Today we're going to focus on two things: biotic, which is the living components of the environment, and abiotic, which are the non-living components of an environment. Let's talk about environmental factors. Environmental factors are anything living or non-living that influence living organisms. There are two types of environmental factors. Number one, biotic factors. This includes all living components of the environment to include plants, animals, and microscopic organisms. Number two, we have the abiotic factors. This includes all the non-living components of the environment to include water, soil, sunlight, air, minerals, weather, fire, etc. Here are some examples of biotic factors. So this little graphic here shows you plants, it shows you large animals, but then we have all these smaller things too. Fungi, which is something we can see, but then we have a few other smaller organisms that we would call microorganisms that are huge parts of our living environment. So those are biotic factors as well, even though we can't see them. Then we have several abiotic factors, and these are all examples of things that would be considered non-living, but they really play a huge role in our environments and in our biomes. How do abiotic factors influence our environment? Well, if there is no water, can anything grow or survive? Of course not. If it's extremely cold one winter, will that affect whether an animal can survive? Absolutely. So abiotic and biotic factors do affect each other. Even though water and temperature aren't living things, they do affect living things. Both plants and animals require sunlight for survival. Sunlight is an abiotic factor. Sunlight is non-living. Plants require sunlight for photosynthesis, and animals depend on plants for survival. Both plants and animals require water and gas. The gas would be O2 or CO2 for survival. Water is another abiotic factor. Animals depend on water for hydration required by cells for survival. Plants also depend on water and carbon dioxide for photosynthesis. This process creates glucose or sugars and O2 for animals. That O2 is that breathable oxygen that you and I depend on to survive. Climate is an abiotic factor that has a huge impact on the biotic or the living organisms of various ecosystems. For example, there's a huge difference between a desert and a rainforest, and that difference is the abiotic factor of rainfall. The amount of rainfall each of these biomes receives annually affects the plant and animal life. The plants and animals have been adapted to be able to survive in these environments. So here's just a picture of a desert and a picture of a rainforest, just to give you a visual representation of the vast differences between the two. And you can see by looking at them how the entire landscape is different, the plant life is different, and though there are no animals in these pictures, or at least not ones that we can see, I bet you've already thought of some animals that live in both of these different biomes and how different those animals are. Here's another visual representation, and this one does include the living species of both the desert animals and the rainforest. And you can just simply look at them, and not only do you see that the landscape is different and the plant life is different, but you can see the living organisms are also very different from one another in size, shape, color, things of that nature. Living organisms also depend on other living organisms for survival, as depicted in this food web below. So when you look at our picture here, we can see different organisms, how they feed off of one another. So the sunlight creates the energy for the plants. The plants flourish and grow. Then we have other organisms that depend on the plants. So here we have the caterpillars, and then the bees help with additional plant reproduction. But then we have organisms that eat both the caterpillars and the bees, which would be our lizard, and then we have a snake that's going to eat our lizard, and then we have our owl who is going to eventually eat our snake. And you can see how these living things all depend on one another within this food web. So, in summary, living organisms require both biotic and abiotic factors for survival. Their relationship is one that can be described as interdependence, when two or more things depend on each other. Plants and animals, which are the biotic factors, could not survive without things like sunlight, which is energy, water, and grass, and those things are abiotic factors. The next time you're outside, take a look at your surroundings and identify all of the biotic and abiotic factors that you can see.